Welcome to Wrestling and Everything Coast to Coast with your host, Buddy Sotello Esquire, and wrestling's premier photographer, Mike Lano, and our special guest commentator for this week and last couple of weeks has been Nikita Breznikov, former, well, I guess still indie manager and known for managing Nikolai Volkov, among other wrestlers. So, yes. Yeah, we mostly talk about your time with Nikolai.
To you, buddy, I don't want to bring this up because it's sad to me, because this is one of the last guys that would go across the aisle politically and work with people. Even though he was a Republican, he was a good American, a war guy. Bob Dole passed away. And this was a guy who would work with Democrats and all of that stuff, was gracious like John McCain was. And it's sad to see those old guard, when the Republican Party was fairly normal, leave, and it's leaving us with what we have now. So I just wanted to say this was a good man, and very sorry that he passed. And, good, he was a lot of things in politics, and again, not afraid to work with what he would term the heels in the Democrats. But you have some thoughts.
Here's my Bob Dole story. My dad, who only voted Republican once, and our family never forgave him for that. He voted for Reagan in '84, but when Bob Dole was running for president, he made a mistake, and he kept calling the Los Angeles Dodgers, he kept calling them the Brooklyn Dodgers. He kept referring to them as the Brooklyn Dodgers. And my dad was
they were one of the Brooklyn Dodgers.
Oh, yeah, my dad was a fan of the Brooklyn Dodgers. And then when he moved back west, he became a Giants fan. And I've been a legendary Giants fan ever since. But he said, look, if Bob Dole can get the Dodgers to move back to Brooklyn, I will vote Republican again. So that's my dad.
I think the Dodgers moved in like 55, 56. They had to play at the LA Coliseum until they built Dodger Stadium, which was a historic facility. Those Dodger dogs are the best hot dogs in baseball. I grew up there. I started taking pictures behind the home plate and third base from about 64 till 68. My grandfather serviced their alcohol, the liquor needs and stuff for the stadium. So we got, all kinds of backstage. But and I want to urge people, I had my own health stuff the last week out of the blue. I had a colonoscopy. You're supposed to have them every 10 years, starting age 50. So I had them religiously at 50, 60, never had any problem. So urging people to go when it's time, do that. Wear your mask, get vaccinated. But Russ, we talked about at least Terry Funk, who I've known pretty much since 67, 68, when he'd come into Los Angeles, and roomed with him, various times at ECW when I'd be flown out there, and if the hotel was sold out, the Red Roof or whatever, he'd let me share the room. But I have not talked to him in about 3 months, and I was apprehensive about talking about his condition on here, but his oldest daughter that lives near him put him in that assisted living place, and Scott Casey, former wrestling great from the Dallas area, went and visited him and didn't care for the facility. And since his wife Vicky died about 3 years ago, Terry has gone downhill. So you have some updates on both Steve Mongo McMichael, we know from the Chicago Bears. He was on WCW commentary team, and then Ric Flair and the Horsemen at that time in WCW, the 97 period, 98, tried their best to get him to a working wrestler. But tell us what's going on with Mongo and Terry Funk.
Well, but first of all, Nikita, I just want to know if you had ever done any work with either of those two individuals. Probably less likely Mongo, but perhaps Terry Funk.
Definitely being on shows with Terry, yeah.
Yes.
And good guy, of course, without a doubt.
Legend of legends. Legend of legends, and there couldn't be a more humble guy. I want to throw this in. I said this a couple times. I got to stay there during his WrestleFest in '97. He had it was like his 1 millionth retirement, and he later told me, "Oh, I was only retiring in Amarillo." But he had a big show, and then there was a private party at the Double Cross Ranch with all the ECW and Japanese talent, like the Headhunters and so many women from like FMW and Jake Roberts and Grizzly Smith and Sam Houston. Anyway, I got to spend the night at the Double Cross Ranch as I did at the Stu and Helen's famous mansion up there before it was sold, and the room was above the dungeon. And anyway, so tell us about, Nikita, tell us about your Terry Funk experiences before Russ goes into what's going on with both these gentlemen.
We were in California, Lancaster, California, at a show, and it was so funny. Nikolai and Sheik are there. Of course, I'm managing them, and they're going back and they were like a married couple. They loved each other, but they couldn't stop fighting. And Terry Funk's laughing his ass off. He's like, "Man, some things just never change." I said, "Terry, what are you talking about?" He said, "They were always like that. Oh, you missed this spot. You blew that spot. No, it's your fault. No, it's your fault." He said, "Man, some things just never change." He said, of course, he loved those two guys without a doubt. The brotherhood is always there, but you could just feel Terry Funk was wrestling. That was it. He lived and breathed it. He, like Bruno Sammartino and the whole group, that's it. You think about wrestling, you put these names there with him. God help him. God bless him. But Jesus.
Let me say this: at the very first Russell Fan Fest in 2005 in Tampa, I was the hired photographer. But I only bring that up because I got to do dream poses, which is kind of my thing in the industry. If I'm known for anything when I pass away, it's bringing, like at that thing, I brought Bruno over to pose with Dory and Terry together in one shot, and Bruno to pose with a guy. I brought them both together on the Legends Radio that Evan and I did for all those years at the same time, and Evan and I just shut up and let those two talk, Jack Briscoe and Bruno Sammartino. I mean, it really doesn't get better than that. I posed, and only because I begged the both of them. They hated each other. Nick Bockwinkel and Bruno to pose. Bruno with Abby, Abdullah the Butcher. Bruno with the Funks, Jack and Jerry Briscoe, and Harley Race all in one shot. Bruno with Piper and Mick Foley, with Bruno in the middle in one shot, etc. Terry was always up for those things, particularly he and Dory posing with Bruno. They only had one All Japan tour where they were on the thing together, but it kind of warmed my heart to do those things. Or Terry shot the Terry versus Nick Bockwinkel match when both were respective NWA, AWA champs. And yeah, as Nikita said, Terry Funk has always been wrestling. So it's Russ, what's the latest on the situation with Mongo McMichael and, of course, the great Terry Funk?
Well, apparently, Steve Mongo McMichael earlier in 2021 was diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's disease, ALS, and the advancement that's happened, unfortunately, for Steve McMichael. Sometimes people have, like 5 or 10 years of ALS before it deteriorates, but he's had a situation where it's really advanced itself all within 1 year, and so he's bedridden now, and he's probably going to be able to celebrate New Year's Eve with us, but I'm not sure he'll be around for Valentine's Day. Let's just put it that way. The advancement that he's had is just so radical and so intense that sometimes with ALS, it's like you light a match and you just drop it on somebody and they just burst into flames. The ALS just racks their system so quickly that, there may have been other things. McMichael was part of the NFL back before they did a lot of steroid testing, and certainly, there probably wasn't a whole lot of steroid testing going on in WCW. And I'm not saying he brought that on with steroids or anything like that, but that era had a lot of drugs.
What is Lou Gehrig's? Is it because I didn't have to study it in dental school. It wasn't anything affecting me. But is it a virus? Are there any known causatives? Because, it's not just limited to athletes. A lot of regular people. Because Lou Gehrig was a famous baseball player, a legend.
Right. And of all the people in the world, he happened to come down with the Lou Gehrig's disease. No, just it is a nervous. It's an attack of the nervous system, but it's apparently got more of a genetic background to it. It's not a virus. It's not something that you catch. It's just something that your body, like,
then, because I have MS, but I can move around with meds.
It's like multiple sclerosis. Yeah.
I have, but I've got, like, Richard Pryor had it, and Montel Williams, and Terry Garr, the famous, great, wonderful actress. But that one, it's not supposed to be familial or genetic, passed down. But my mom had it, quickly wheelchair bound. Two uncles had it that were famous Hollywood producers, both, quickly wheelchair bound. So I'm still mobile, but I didn't know if there was like a precipitating type thing.
We don't know. I mean, we probably will never know, or maybe, that my kids.
There's not a lot of research that's been successful with it, but it will put you down. Catfish Hunter had it. A couple other famous, Dave McNally, Baltimore Orioles, he had it. It makes you paralyzed, basically. In the later stages, you can't do anything but talk and breathe, and everything else just doesn't work. It's a curse. It really is.
It's horrific. Some guys can't talk; they just have the tube, and they're just like breathing, and they're barely, alive. And it's oh man, it's so well.
He was a legendary Bears player. He was part of the championship team. And
to Fridge Perry. Nikita, remember him getting involved in wrestling, WrestleMania 2, that Battle Royal?
The Battle Royale, yes.
Refrigerator, yeah.
And you know who did the best out of that entire group of football players that were in the Battle Royale? Who lasted the longest?
Russ Francis?
49er tight end Russ Francis. You want to know why that is? You probably do know why.
I do, because I know him, and he does PR for WWE, but his father, Ed Francis, who I brought to Legends Radio, was the legend of all legend. He was a wrestler, but Ed Francis then promoted in Hawaii's glory period, the 60s and 70s, at what it's now called Blaisdell, but then it was the fabulous Honolulu International Center, the HIC. And I've told you that some of the cards I got to shoot and go see there, but he and Lord Blears, a sort of right-hand man, even though Ed Francis was the promoter, but Tally-Ho Blears did all the TV, amazing wrestling. And there were others. It wasn't just Russ as the son of Ed, but there were two other brothers that tried their hand at wrestling. But Russ was the most adept at it and had a lot of AWA. Pretty much most of his stuff was AWA. But he did wrestle on some Honolulu cards. I think Leah Maivia might have had him on one. She kind of aggressively took over. But was that what you were going to say, Russ? He comes from. A lot of people don't know that Russ Francis came from a wrestling background. I mean, he actually knew what he was doing in the ring. He didn't embarrass himself. And he was the last football player that was eliminated. Wasn't Jim McMahon the quarterback of the Bears? Was he not in that WrestleMania 2? I'm trying to think who else was.
No, he would have been killed. Killed. No, yeah. The only thing that he was known for.
Horrific disease, not Lou Gehrig's, but Jim McMahon had some horrible disease amidst the concussions and crap that he had.
Yeah, and he was tackled once, totally unfairly. And he was just standing there, and that guy for Cincinnati just grabbed him and did a body slam on him. Like a suplex on him when the play was actually over. It was one of the cruel, and he was never the same after that. But and then of course, we wanted to get Terry Funk on the show a long time ago, and his daughter through the guy that runs his social media. I guess he was hired or he volunteered for the job. Just asked me not to, and he had to pull from John Arizzi's show and some other ones because sometimes the memory goes. I've got some saved voice messages from him. I would never share with anybody because I would never, he just sounded out of it. At different times he'd be fine, like J.J. Dillon, but at other times, some Alzheimer's is getting in there. And so what's the latest with our hero, Terry Funk? Just that his condition continues to worsen, and unfortunately, like we've said, with a lot of things that deal with ALS and with Terry Funk, I think it's Parkinson's at this stage, and other dementia that is set in. It just doesn't get better; it just gets worse. It can shorten your longevity, both Alzheimer's and dementia.
and I'm not a real expert. I know dementia is the far worse one. You don't want that. Alzheimer's. I sometimes think I was on Busted Open, the biggest wrestling show on the planet, 6 days a week, 3 hours on Sirius XM. But they wanted me to talk about Dory Dixon, and we can maybe talk some more about this. But I thought I was having some Alzheimer's because I said, if you look at I've talked about this before on the show when I've talked about Black American, African American wrestlers and our Jackie Robinsons. And I said yesterday, and it was an Alzheimer's moment, I go, on my Mount Rockefeller of greatest Black wrestlers, I meant Mount Rushmore, but I said Mount Rockefeller. And I just laughed later because that probably surely didn't come out right. But Mark Henry didn't really know who Dory Dixon was. He kind of had an inkling who Earl Maynard was. So if we're going to look at the first Jackie Robinson of wrestling was Jim Mitchell, the Panther, the Black Panther, Jim Mitchell, who really broke the barriers like in the 40s where there just weren't Black wrestlers getting hired. And then if you look at the TV era from about 56, 57 through the early 60s, for both Fred Kohler, the Chicago syndicated wrestling show on the Dumont Network, but also for Vince McMahon Sr. and the Goldust Trio, etc. They were almost like the New Day because these guys were true friends behind the scenes and watched out for each other. But they were sort of a clique. They stayed together. They needed to protect each other, and that was Bobo Brazil, Sailor Art Thomas, Sweet Daddy Siki, Reggie Siki, and the great Dory Dixon. Now, Dory Dixon, a lot of people don't know, but this guy had one of the best bodies in wrestling, all natural, no roids. He was kind of short. He was from Jamaica, but he somehow, I don't know the full story. I'll have to look that up, who broke him in, how he came to the U.S. But he was, I think he held the Vince McMahon Senior's tag titles with Art Thomas or Reggie Siki, and that was a big deal in the late 50s, during the Rocca and Miguel Perez days and all of that. But he got most of his fame, and he did come in for us in Los Angeles for about 7-8 months in 1972, and he won the tag titles with Earl Maynard, who was a former Mr. Universe, experienced a lot of racism in a lot of places. Earl Maynard, one of the nicest guys in the world. I still keep up with him. He's in the Bahamas. Dory Dixon, though, went on to bigger fame than his U.S. stuff in Mexico for decades. He wrestled. He could speak 5 languages, including Spanish, and also then became a promoter, and then most importantly, part of the Mexican Lucha Libre Commission. So the group he worked for, world's oldest promotion down there, CMLL, EMLL, the Luderoth, Paco Alonso now runs it. But he's part of that lineage from Salvador Luderoth. That promotion is like 73, 74 years old with continuous TV. So very prestigious. And he is up there. And, other people we've included, of course, the Shooter, one of Luthez's favorites, a hooker shooter, and Luther Lindsay, Shag Thomas. You could go up and down a lot of Bearcat Wright.
Nikita, did you ever manage any Black wrestlers while you were, or any? I mean, technically Nikolai Volkov was a minority because he was Jewish, wasn't he?
No.
Oh, Nikolai was not Jewish. Okay, I thought he was. But did you ever manage any Black wrestlers or any Hispanic wrestlers while you were?
Like for one night, something like that, but not a continuous period. You're always willing to fill in and pinch hit, do whatever is needed. But yeah, without a doubt, but not like I would be able to say, well, he was my protege kind of thing, just kind of a one night stand. But
when you were managing, did you ever see any kind of over the top racism or any kind of oh, that's good.
Not my time. No, my gosh, everything. Nobody was going to play anything like that. Those days were long gone. I mean, look, you'd be with Tony Atlas and people like that, Coco Beware. It's like nobody's messing with them. They're more than happy to have them on the card. Even the lower guys that are maybe not household names, it's like, no, you want to do what's right. You don't want to create any kind of heat or problem. State athletic commissions were at a lot of those shows. A lot of people don't realize we really were regulated and we really were watched. So it's like, yeah, nobody's
not us in California. That was always the running joke. Was the state athletic commissioner?
It was, yeah. I mean, it was to a point, but then it stopped. I would think around the early '80s, though, Russ, before you got into managing.
Yeah, I never saw a state athletic.
There was a commissioner that came a couple of times because he was called to Kirk White's shows. There was some heat or some problems, and I'm not sure. He was an Asian American guy, very nice guy, but he was called to watch. I don't know, and we never saw him at APW or up at the Sacramento promotion or inland where Brian Cage comes from. The Stockton, Modesto area, which has a pretty thriving area in there too. I was going to say, Evan remembers this. I think it's one of Evan's great memories. And it actually happened at my St. Louis convention in 1991, the Sam Munchnick 3-day weekend for the boys, where just a ton of the boys, they all trans themselves in, put themselves over. Not for me, or not because of me, but because of their respect and love for Sam Munchnick, who was, he was in ill health, and they came to honor him. And we're talking about everyone from my master of ceremonies, Lou Thez and Killer Kowalski and Jimmy Snuka and Stan Hansen and on down. I had quite a few guys at that thing, and Evan was a big help. But Killer Kowalski up there, we did various tributes, like tributes to the wives, tributes to midgets, or what we call now little people wrestlers, the Bruiser Brody thing. But during our tribute to African American wrestlers, Killer Kowalski got up there and he said, even though my hated opponent was Bobo Brazil, I would sneak him into my hotel. So here we just main evented for an hour. Everybody loved him in the town, but they wouldn't rent him a private room at the nearby hotel. So he'd, when the manager would shut out the lights, I'd sneak him into my hotel room and, bring him food and all this stuff. And you could tell Kowalski, Walter loved Bobo. So it was even emotional for me to recall Kowalski, who was, as great a heel as he was, one of the greatest of all times, Nikita, if you saw him in his prime. What a sweet guy. And Evan, I know, would probably be chiming in right now and interrupting me for a change. That Kowalski, because...
Did you work any shows, Nikita, with Kowalski?
He was the first guy to ever give me a payday. Wow. I went with Nikolai to Boston. I put it in the book when it was real. It's in there. Nikolai said, "You want to go Boston?" At that time, from Baltimore to Boston was $30. It was flying. So it's like, yeah, of course they took care of Nikolai. So I said, hell, to work for Kowalski. The night before, we were on Richard Burns' show. We were Heat Faces that night. Walter was the referee. He saves me. The next day in Waltham was his show. So we're heels. So we do our thing. At the end of the night, he's paying everybody. He says, "Hey, kid, come here." I said, "What's up, Walter?" He says, "Here, put that in your pocket and take care of Nikolai." I said, "Wow." He's like, "Just go. You did great. Keep it up." So I'm like, "Take care of Nikolai? What the hell?" I'm new to this business. But then I got to know later on what they were talking about. Poor Nikolai. You got to watch him. But yeah, Walter, of course, he's Polish. I got Polish heritage, so we spoke the same language. That was just a good time. Always a nice guy. And Nikolai said he did not make a lot of money on that show. He didn't have to do that. I said, well, I sure didn't expect it. I was more than happy to be there, but that was my first payday from Kowalski.
If you would have seen him, so I brought this up yesterday, Dory Dixon and some of the lucha guys like Raul Amato were deathly afraid. If you can think of our Brock Lesnar in 1972 was Killer Kowalski. He would literally just destroy these guys, and he was what we call the killer heel. And Dory Dixon had to work with Walter, and he was legit scared of him because Walter looked like a monster. Then he wasn't wearing the rug, and he was, even though he was a vegetarian, he was just really built like an S house. And was a killer heel when we also had Ernie Ladd, who Dory Dixon also had to face, and superstar Billy Graham. We had these three huge bodies, but particularly Killer Kowalski, who had those amazing legit hour draws, etc. with Bruno. I mean, anybody that Walter would wrestle was incredible. And Dory had a great match with him, although he had a flying style. He'd have to bounce off and bump like crazy for Walter. But, I mean, those are dream matches. You talk about guys with aura. And all of those guys, whether it was Earl Maynard, who I was going to ask Mike Rogers, who we were going to have on the show. He's got a terrific new book out. I urge everybody. His last name is spelled Rodgers, and on the cover he's got Thez and Don Leo Jonathan and Apache Bull Ramos, who had the very last match with Bruno at the old Madison Square Garden before they closed it, I think in '66, and reopened the new Garden. But the very last Bruno title match was against Apache Bull Ramos, who was also an incredible heel, and I was lucky enough to see him in L.A. and he lost a hair versus hair match with Mil Mascaras, as did Black Gordman.
In your background picture.
Yes. Yeah. I forgot about that. There it is right there. There's Apache Bull Ramos.
Yes.
And those guys had aura. It's a little different now. Well, it's quite a bit different. It's different because those guys, you look at the matches they had, and you really can't compare them to the high spot laden matches they have now. But those guys, particularly the Americans who were asked to come to Japan, when I asked the various guys there and promoters in All Japan and New Japan, what makes these guys special? They said it's their aura. It is oozing out of their pores, whether it was Bruiser and Crusher, who didn't have particularly great matches, or maybe somebody like Mad Dog Vachon in his day, not the 80s Mad Dog Vachon, but the 60s who could really go, or obviously Thez or Carl Gotch or Billy Robinson, who were on a whole different class, or Blassie, or not Iron Sheik, but what I call the real Sheik, the fireball throwing Sheik, Ed Farhat. They had this aura, this amazing presence, and I don't often see it in today's wrestlers. They kind of do with Brock, maybe Roman Reigns, quite a few guys in AEW. Not a whole lot of guys Flair had it, and most of those guys from the 80s.
Jericho, I would put Jericho in that list.
I'm just talking about, an aura of just, some of the guys that had aura didn't necessarily do great promos. Bruiser and Crusher weren't great promos. Billy Graham was, but he couldn't wrestle well. But he had that aura and, was an amazing, amazing guy. Because I actually saw guys, if he was in a match with, like in Houston, with Don Leo Jonathan or Johnny Valentine, they would bring Force Billy up to their level and make him look good to hide some of the shortcomings. And, Jesse Ventura, who I was going to ask Mike Rogers about too. So go on Amazon, get Mike Rogers' history book, because it's part one of a 3-part series. But he has interviews with legends, and we're talking really long interviews with Don Leo Jonathan and so many of the great, everybody came through his home base territory, although he covered other stuff as a historian. That big Don Owens Portland. Everybody, Rick Martel, Kurt Hennig, before they became stars on a national level, like Martel.
That was something I wanted to ask Nikita about, is that while you were managing, was there someone that you thought was going to be a really big star and didn't become a star and just somehow just faded into the background? And was there anyone that you thought wasn't really going to be that big of a success that wound up being a huge success?
Two that come to mind, of course, is Evan's dear friend Tiger Khan. He had the look. It's like, what the hell? What are they not getting with this guy? But that was really before the lightweights started to take off, because he was a little bit on the lighter side, but he had a good body. He had that damn great look about him. He had heel written all over him. Just give him a manager, do something. You could put this kid way over the top, and he'll be drawing heat. And the other one was Kid USA, Armand Cesari, who was Mickey Rourke's stunt double in The Wrestler.
Oh,
but
wow.
I worked so many indie shows with him. He had it. He had a great entrance. He was a good looking guy. The girls were going nuts for him. He had a good body and he could work. That's why he and Nikolai had a lot of great matches. Hundreds of great matches, but he never caught on. I don't know why. And you would think The Wrestler, being Rourke's stunt double, that may have catapulted him. Nope. Just seemed like that was it for him. That was the kiss of death. I don't know why.
Yeah, I was going to ask.
Any of this stuff.
True. Was there someone that's become a big hit that you like are mystified by? Like why is he such a huge hit now? Anyone or why they became big hits over time?
No, because you're really happy for people because it's kind of like you don't know why what I just explained, but when it happens, it's like, hey, I'm glad for you. That's great. You made it. Go for it, man. Ride it all the way to the sunset as long as you can. Just deal with it. Whatever gets you over the, like some of the main thing that people that I knew, but some of the shit like Doink the Clown, and it's like, what the hell are you talking about here? This kind of crazy shit, but the kids loved it.
Yeah,
They
got
made a lot
over.
of money off of it, you know.
Dink, Wink, and Pink, though, I think was the final straw on that when they had the 4 midget clowns.
They milked that cow until it
lost
bled.
Matt Bourne as the original Doink. He left or I think he got fired, and then they hired what was the guy's name who played the second Doink for the longest?
I think it was Steve Lombardi.
Apollo. But Matt Bourne then took the gimmick to ECW when I was shooting every one of their house shows and TVs and all of that. And he called himself Born Again, but he painted half of his face and half of his body like one of those circus freaks was Doink, and the other half was just him as himself, Matt, Tough Tony Born. It was called Born Again. And it was so funny seeing, half of the Doink face on one side. It was very clever, and he was a great wrestler, as his dad was, Tough Tony Born. He was second generation. Tough Tony Born started Lonnie Main out. They were partners in the 60s before Lonnie became the Moondog Lonnie Main, and the very first Moondog who spawned all of those other Moondogs, like the Memphis ones, the Tri-WF ones who were tag champs. And
Rex and Spot.
Yeah.
I loved him as Moondog Main. He would eat the goldfish in the ring, and he was wild with Lou Albano managing him. It was just unbelievable. Oh, he wore that. It was like a pullover thing with the rope, and he tied it around him, and he looked like a boxcar. He was just like, man, this guy. He wasn't tall, but he was wide. And
one of the very first promos that I ever saw as a child was Moondog Main. And I remember it because he made himself into a bowling ball. Did you ever see the promo where he like set up pins in an alley and like threw himself down the alley and skidded down the alley and hit the bowling pins over?
What happened? Was that in Portland or San Francisco?
I think it was shown on Big Time Wrestling in the Bay Area, but I think it may have been taken from something that happened in Portland. But just that over the top, like, the goldfish eating and all that stuff. As a kid,
he would take what Blassie used to do as a heel in the 60s. He came down to San Francisco, but he'd come in. He was in Los Angeles as a babyface at various times in the 66, 68. But he came down for the first time December of 73, January 74, doing the Moondog, and he was recreating what he'd done in San Francisco for Roy Shire. But there was glass eating. He would break.
That's right.
Glass, yeah.
That's right.
And cut up his chest. He cut up his chest legit because you could see blood. Wasn't worked. Eat the glass. Obviously, this was after eating the live goldfish. He did this thing. I don't think I've said this on this show. I forget what he called it. It wasn't a Mabel because that was something else. In wrestling as a rib, but he told, and we would see him and ride around with him. He was legit nuts and a sadomasochist because he loved, sort of like Johnny Valentine. He would scare the guys that he was facing, even as a face. He'd say, "I want you to really lay him in because if you show any light, I'm going to kick the shit out of you in the locker room." So Lonnie Main though had this thing where he would tell us at KCOP TV, the Los Angeles TV studio in 73, 74, that this is before the fans were let in, that he did this thing where he would spit a big, huge Mick Foley type loogie in the air. This is before Mick Foley, though. When he was in bed with his wife, she would pull the covers over her head to avoid getting hit with the big loogie, and then he'd fart. And he had a name for it, and it kind of caught on. And some of the wrestlers said they started trying to pull that, on their wives. And I think one of them it led to a divorce or separation.
I wouldn't blame them.
It's just nutty stuff. But Lonnie Main, the period you're talking about when he came in was managed by Captain Lou, 73 in the Tri-WF. He didn't work out for whatever reason, didn't last more than a couple of months there for a couple of title matches, particularly Boston with Beto. But at the same time, Albano's managing Blassie, and they have a fake title they just gave him because he was not, they called it the Pacific Coast Championship, but he didn't have it. He dropped the America's title. He wasn't champion any longer, but they put it on him, Vince Sr. did. And here are three guys trying to hog the microphone. It was still pretty early in Albano's managing career in the Tri-WF for Vince Sr. You have Blassie and Lonnie Main and Captain Lou all doing these insane, they're trying to get mic time, and you got three guys that were awesome on the mic. It was pretty incredible, Nikita. I know you must have.
Oh, I love it.
And the Ray Stevens I think he was in a couple months prior to that.
Yeah, the end of 72.
But we're talking 72, so he could really still go. And a match against Morales, who we knew from San Francisco, that had to have been off the charts. I did not get to see footage of that, or it was not there.
It was okay, but he really didn't make the circuit. Again, it's like when he came back in 82, it was just basically to do the Snuka angle because he didn't get a run with Backlund. They wrestled once at the Meadowlands, once in Boston, but he didn't do the circuits with Backlund, which I think was a shame. No, he did not in 82. No, he did.
So he only had like a couple of matches with Backlund.
Just a couple, yeah. And one, they had a dark match. And so it was like, geez, that's terrible. But I wish we would have gotten Patterson and Stevens in some way, shape, or form throughout at any point in the WWF. It would have been just wonderful to see.
That's true. Those guys were legends here in San Francisco. Patterson and Stevens. I mean, Ray Stevens is basically the Ric Flair of the Bay Area. I mean, his legend.
Because Ric Flair in Mid-Atlantic credits Ray Stevens and Buddy Rogers for really honing him. After he broke in with Billy Robinson and Vern Gagne at Vern Gagne's camp in 72, 73, and a couple of years later, after jobbing for Vern's TV, he goes to Mid-Atlantic, but he credits Ray Stevens and Buddy Rogers for really spending a lot of time with him at the gym and the arenas before they let the fans in. Now, I, of course, got to shoot Ray and Pat a million times in San Francisco, but Pat, when he got there, and when he got there, he really became fast friends with Vince Jr., but he was responsible for bringing in all of the San Francisco Shire guys. Peter Maivia, he brought Fuji back because Fuji had heat with Vince Sr. He brought in Peter Maivia.
But Fuji with Saito.
Yeah, it was a different, and Saito, Pat really helped get him acquainted with Americanized customs because there was that rumor that Baba had sent Mr. Saito, Masa Saito, to America in 70, 71 as punishment for doing something bad in All Japan. And he would, finally bring it. Actually, Inoki was the one that brought him back. But he formed a tag team with Kenji Shibuya. And at the same time, which was unheard of, they were Roy Shire's tag champs, the world tag champs. There were many NWA World Tag Champs then. Obviously, the Mid-Atlantic, they had NWA World Tag Champs. The Sheik in Detroit had World Tag Champs. But they were World Tag Champs for Shire, and at the same time, America's Tag Champs, the top tag titles in Los Angeles. Same time, headlining two territories, unrelated. That was not done in the territories, and those guys did it. But Pat brought in Morocco, and then Ray Stevens. So
because it was like, who the hell is this Morocco? And then he takes the world over. In 1981, he was like a freight train. And when he came back at the end of 82 with the 83 run, he was on top of the world. And how about Rocky Johnson? I think Pat brought him into.
Rocky was his tag partner. They were Roy Shire's tag champions 2, possibly even 3 times, because Rocky held the tag titles with literally every babyface: Peter Maivia, Pepper Gomez, and obviously Pat. But I shot so many. It was one of the first matches I came up and shot as soon as Pat turned babyface. He and Rocky Johnson against Shibuya and Saito in San Jose for, it was Roy Shire's policeman, John Swensky, was the promoter. Swensky had been a world junior heavyweight champion in like the 30s with guys like Leroy McGurk. I think swapped and this was when the NWA World Junior Heavyweight Championship, the Danny Haas one, was really prestigious. It really was almost up there with the NWA Heavyweight title, which is what Billy Corgan's trying to bring back now in his version of the NWA, which had that big pay-per-view yesterday. So I hope people ordered it and supported it and stuff. But yeah, so Pat bringing in it, I hear Nikita, it would have been fun to have seen them in the ring doing something together, maybe not opposing each other, but as a tag team. But that was what Ray told me, was that Pat had thrown him a bone and some good paydays by bringing him in.
And that was a good set because he worked with Snuka in the Mid-Atlantic. Ray did, so everything was perfect. But let's not forget Sgt Slaughter. Pat brought him in and helped really mold that Sgt Slaughter character, because he was not Sgt Slaughter before he came to the WWS, and they had worked together before.
The Patterson Slaughter feud. I remember the unbreakable Cobra Clutch challenge.
Oh, that's what. Other than Sayama Dynamite Kid, the original Tiger Mask Dynamite Kid, which is the greatest match ever in TriWF history at Madison Square Garden, the boot cap match between Pat Patterson and Sgt Slaughter, people say that was really during the Backlund era. That was just an absolutely incredible match. You can watch it on YouTube or the network, but it was pretty damn phenomenal. Because Pat didn't go through Mid-Atlantic really. He might have met Sarge in Florida because he did that stint for Eddie Graham in Florida. I wonder how Pat met Sarge, or
out in Minnesota, probably.
Yeah, you're right.
Tied to the AWA, yeah, I would think so.
Sarge, Vernon trained Sarge. I saw Sarge, the first time I ever saw him was in Kansas City. He was doing a Superstar Billy Graham surfer gimmick, and Jesse Ventura was there too, and he was also doing a surfer, total ripoff of Billy Graham. The both of them later, Hogan would take that to a new level. But this, I'm talking like 1976, 77. Right. In both Kansas City and St. Louis for Wrestling at the Chase, the real Wrestling at the Chase that I was blessed enough to have shot a couple of times.
I managed to meet Sgt Slaughter in 2000, the Cauliflower Alley. And to me, that was a bucket list meeting, because Sgt Slaughter was always my hero when I was growing up. And the feud between him and your pal, Nikolai Volkov, was, I think, and the Iron Sheik, was one of the hottest feuds I think that I ever witnessed as a professional.
Well, that's why I'm quick to correct people when they talk about Hulkamania. I said, yeah, that was a nice, when things change, yeah, Hogan had that company behind him, but Sheik and Slaughter's feud was big, and so was Nikolai and the Sheik as a tag team, and then Piper. So it's like, it wasn't just Hogan for the Hulkamania era, it was everybody. Because that,
you remember early on when Vince was using music without getting license rights, like for his syndicated TV, he was using Michael Jackson's Thriller.
Yes.
Singing,
that's the opening. Yeah.
Yes.
And Piper's Pit was using Yes, Owner of a Lonely Heart, the instrumental, no singing on that. And then they got into big trouble. Plus there was Hogan's, they had to use
Eye of the Tiger.
Eye of the Tiger, and then JYD's Another One Bites the Dust.
Yeah, they had to stop using Freddie Mercury in Queens.
And that's why I'm a Real American.
But what I'm saying is I remember actually great matches. If people want to see Nikolai and Iron Sheik as a tag team at their best, look at the matches against the Briscoe brothers, and even the lowly WWF. The Briscoes, would have their working shoes on, and that was a pretty exciting time. You may not like WWF now or whatever. Since the Attitude Era, but they were really kicking and fun. The only negatory was when they took over Georgia Championship Wrestling on Black Saturday. That kind of pushed it to, no way. But
it was the foreshadowing of the way things were going to eventually be. Sadly.
Well, Vince took over. Vince's TV took over Southwest Wrestling.
Right, I remember that.
Joe Blanchard's promotion was the first one on USA Network. Nikita has to remember that.
Yeah, I do remember.
There were stars like there was Tully, and there was the kid that died, Gino Hernandez, was on that show, and there was Adrian Adonis as a legit tough guy.
And Adonis was the first champion.
Yeah.
Because they had it like for the NWA belt. He was going against Bob Orton Jr. And it was like, hey, it was a damn good match because you know what? He let him go out there and wrestle a 2 out of 3 fall title match. I remember watching. That was 1982, and it's like, this is good wrestling. WWF, for some reason, you always had to have a bullshit ending. Nobody could get a clean pin. It's like, he's not going to die. It happens. You're better than me one night, then I'm going to be better than you. But it was always the foot on the ropes or just the breath bump bullshit. That's like, come on, man. Can't somebody just have a clean friggin' pin and be done with it? Well, Bruno did when he beat Stasiak, and that date's coming up again. And
yeah.
How
Also,
long was Southwest Wrestling on the USA Network, Nikita? It was a year or less than a year.
About a year. Yeah, it wasn't much more. USA, well, that was Madison Square Garden home, too. The USA Network.
Right. They aired them. It was live on Mondays, wasn't it? Because it was sold out, or did they air it on tape delay a day or two?
I seen a tape delay on Saturday afternoon in Baltimore. So don't ask me about New York because they got they had it better in New York, but we got it Saturdays.
I think they had it live, but that's where a lot of folks can watch the footage of Dynamite Kid and the original Tiger Mask, Satoru Sayama. But
best matches ever.
Oh yeah, it's one of the greatest matches, not in Japan because they had better matches there, but the best match on U.S. soil because it was so earth-shattering, groundbreaking. It would predict the hybridized lucha in
Even
Japan.
if you watch it today, the wrestling still stands out.
Tiger Mask was so quick, and he had such a great counter in Dynamite Kid, similar to Liger and Benoit. That was like X amount of years later, a recreation with two completely different guys, and it was amazing on its level. And I got to shoot a couple of those, ringside. I was blessed, but I never got to shoot Dynamite Sayama live, and I missed out. I can't shoot everything, but amazing. And Murdoch and Adrian Adonis were, I thought, a pretty decent team by WWF standards when they came in. They were very good, and
yes.
They had matches with the Briscoes, and I go, man, this is pretty damn good for WWF.
That was one of the most exciting matches that I saw on TV as a kid, was when they had the non-title tag team match between the Briscoes and Adonis and Murdoch, and the Briscoes wound up winning that match. I remember
figure 4.
That's right. That is absolutely right. I was just about to say that. I remember just running around my brother and I running around the living room when they beat Adonis, because I just couldn't stand Adonis and Murdoch. They just bugged me so much as tag champs. It's really too bad that the Briscoes didn't get a real title run at that stage.
You know why they had that? Because that was it was all politics. Nikita knows, because they were the ones that were the reason for the Black Saturday. They threw in with Jim Barnett, and that's who screwed up Ole Anderson. So the Briscoes were given that as a gimme because then they were given stock and all these promises to come work for Vince. And, Jerry Briscoe stayed. Jack didn't. He went back to doing the Briscoes car repair business where they lived in Tampa, or outside of Tampa, after his wrestling days were done. But having the Briscoes wrestle was just more or less a paycheck, a bone thrown at them for helping kill the Atlanta office and getting that WTBS slot and everything that went with it to Vince. And it was the Briscoes who, I wouldn't say did an et tu brute on Ole Anderson, but they sort of did with promoter Jim Barnett. And it was a shame that they didn't stay longer and they didn't do more of them, because Jack, being a former NWA champion, world heavyweight champion, but Jerry, if people forget, was a former NWA junior world
junior heavyweight. Yes. And the other thing I wanted to bring up this week too was that it was the birthday of Larry Zbyszko this week. I think he turned 70. I believe he's 70, maybe
72.
Yeah. Maybe a little bit older than that, but as far as I know, Larry Zbyszko is still the only person that lost a loser leave town match and has stayed out of town. He never came back to the WWF after losing that Loser Leave Town match with Bruno Sammartino, and that was like 40 years ago. You know,
guys, I gotta go. My back is killing me, but I wanted to say this. I'm going to be off. Evan's coming back the next 2 weeks. I'm going to be off the next 2 weeks to hopefully recuperate.
Yeah, please.
Find out what's causing all this bleeding and stuff with me. But I wanted to say, Evan coming back, and he says in January, there's 5 Sundays in January, and we hope, Nikita is part of the family, so I wouldn't even call him a guest. He's part, very kind the last 2 weeks to come in and host or fill in for Evan with us. And we love having Nikita on, especially to talk history and everything. And I hope, Nikita, you will plug your book as I leave. But Evan says he wants to have big name guests. And we can, of course, have Nikita with us every show, anytime Nikita wants to come on with us. But he's bringing on...
In 3 weeks, we will have God on the show. 3 weeks, we're actually going to have God. We'll manage to book God on the show.
He's got the Oscar for Men on a Mission. I think he was their manager.
That's close. God, Oscar for Men on a Mission. They're very close. Very close.
But I am trying to bring on an actress, so we can't talk wrestling with her, but maybe music and movies, and she hosts locally here, and she's a total legend. Susan Anton, if you remember her.
Oh wow, yeah, I would like.
Big name actress.
Yes, I know her. I know who she is.
She was with Dudley Moore. They never got married, but they were a couple for years and years and years. She's got a TV show called Idle Chat, and she interviews former TV and movie legends. So I thought it'd be kind of fun. And she's still beautiful. I think she's like 70, but she looks a lot better than Larry Zbyszko for 70. I'll tell you.
You book them, we'll get them on the show. As long as they can get on Skype, we're good.
All right. Hopefully we'll do a show maybe the day after or something, because I think Christmas falls on Sunday, even though tonight for our Hanukkah fans, it's the friends. It's the 7th. Isn't it the 7th night of the night of Christmas?
But Christmas is Saturday.
Is it a Saturday?
Yeah, it's a Saturday.
Well, I don't know if we'll see what you guys think if we're going to do a show the day after Christmas on Saturday. But anyway, everybody have a great holiday season. Stay safe. And Nikita, please plug your book, and I'll see you guys 3 weeks from tonight, hopefully.
Yes.
We'll see.
Take care of yourself, Mike.
Yes.
Good night.
Good night. So it's just us again with the
Yes. And I tell you, when Oscar's on, I have to bring up something.
Sure.
He did a song. It was just impromptu. It was in Brooklyn. That was the first time I ever went to an indie show, and he happened to be there. Because I'm like, Nikolai, what the hell is this shit? This isn't wrestling. He said, no, this is indie. But Oscar was there. So he's like, oh, my friend Oscar. And he said, come on, Oscar, sing a song. So he started doing the rap song about Nikolai Volkov. Hey, I got it. I got it on tape. I can make a little recording and play it back and say, Oscar, you remember this? So, yeah, he was a good guy. Very good guy.
Yeah, although Men on a Mission, I'm not sure how in the litany of tag teams in tag team history where they wind up in WWE or WWF tag team legends.
But then Mabel was a part of that, right?
Yeah, he was. Yes.
And look what he went on to become, a big name. Not
figuratively
and literally,
Absolutely, yes. Although the other Man on a Mission, I forgot who I'm sorry.
Mo,
that's right. Mo, I don't know what's happened to him. We'll have to go in and
he fell off the planet. Yeah, I don't know.
We'll have to hunt him down. But so do you have any thoughts you'd like to well, first of all, tell the fans about your book. We've talked about it before in the past, but it's always good to
when it was real. This is what I talk about. When it was real, the WWF in the 70s, 1970 to 79. It's not a history book, whereas you go down the line and say this Backlund beats Arion, Backlund beat Pater. It's a narrative, a running history of what I don't think we missed an angle. It's Crowbar Press, Scott Teal. It's on his site. The Kindle version's available on Amazon, but it's from the heart about what we still talk about 40, 50 years later. On days when things happen, like tonight, I was at the Capitol Center, 1977. It was a battle royal. The two chiefs won, and they flipped a coin, So Strongbow got to wrestle Billy Graham again, and it was like, we were going crazy. We wanted him the Chief to beat Superstar because it meant the world to us. It still does. And that's why when you talk about charisma, I've said it before, you can't make somebody love or hate a wrestler. Your marketing department is not going to be able to pull it off. You either going to project that image, and people will, like George Steele, son of a bitch, because there was a couple of times the Civic Center in Baltimore, they would have to park out on the street because they had the circus was coming to town, so all the animals were inside the parking area or something like that. So, but nobody would bother George Steele. They would look at a distance because believe that this crazy bastard was bite your head off if he got a hold of you. He was nuts. But of course, we know who Jim Myers really was. We find out years later. But he had us believing he was this crazed son of a bitch that you would just flee from. And I was one. When he would look in our direction, we'd climb over each other's backs to get out of the way, man. It was crazy. And then Strongbow, loved by the fans. And he didn't have to do much. Believe me. And I love Chief. I'm not putting him down, but he didn't have to do much, and he had us in his hands. And that's the way it was. It's like we got to work every night because Johnny Valiant, God rest his soul, Chief used to call him Dinky, Johnny told me. And he said, Dinky, take it easy. They can see it, but they can't feel it. And he's like, you're right, Chief, you're right, because we got to work tomorrow night, and we got to work the night after that, and after that. So it's like, there's no sense killing each other.
Right, but still, they wanted to get people to believe, and they were able to do things in the ring that made people believe. And right now, I think that sort of level of belief just isn't there, and that intensity. And
they're killing each other. That's the crazy part. They're actually beating each other's brains out, and people will laugh and say, "Oh, it's all phony shit." And it's like, no, it's not. But
yeah, I don't know if you saw the recent pictures of Cody Rhodes going through the table in the AEW event, and it was a burning table he went through, and they showed his back afterwards, and it's all scarred up with burns, second-degree burns, and things like that. And it's kind of all for nothing because the fans are so jaded right now that it doesn't even affect them when they see something like that. And it's just, I kind of long for the days where a guy could work a headlock and the fans cared whether somebody reversed the headlock or reversed the hammerlock, where you could do the arm wringer shtick, where you rake the arm, you hit it a couple times, you do the around the head and that kind of thing. No one wants to see that sort of stuff, but it used to be a real staple of how you built up a match to make it working an arm and staying on the arm the whole time.
That was wrestling.
Yeah. That's what people, it built up a story during the actual match. Now there's actually, nobody works a body part. Nobody tries the low stuff early and builds up to a finishing move. It's instead finishing move after finishing move after finishing move, and no sell, no sell, no sell, and then fake finish, fake finish, fake finish, until you have, either a crappy finish where, somebody gets disqualified, or you do have somebody, after you've lifted the ring up and dropped it on their head, then they finally get a pin. But I look at things like Sgt Slaughter's Cobra Clutch, and how that was such an unbreakable hold that Pat Patterson had a $15,000 challenge with Sgt Slaughter over how he could break the Cobra Clutch. And when he finally did it, the fans went completely crazy, or Big John Studd when he said he couldn't be slammed and Andre the Giant slammed him,
I did a story for a publication years ago when the story was called, Can You Hold a Hold? Whatever happened to the abdominal stretch or the sleeper? What's wrong with that? That's wrestling. That's what we want to see. The Cobra Clutch, yeah, that was great. And that was a good idea the way they did break it, because just before or not break it, the way they ended it just before Patterson. He didn't really get out of it. Slaughter lets it go, and then the controversy, did he break it? Did he let go? And then they were killing each other, which led to the alley fight. And it was like that alley fight. I seen Sarge post stories. He said, me and my wife were going to go the next day on a trip. He said, but he did it right. It's just like unbelievable. The gash was crazy. He said she almost fainted. He said, I felt really, he said, I was weak the next day. I lost so much blood. I was a little bit dizzy. I was disoriented. You know, we go on this trip and it was like, man, I'm not really here because it took a hell of a beating the night before. And Patterson was laying in some good shots with the boots once he was opened up. It's like, hey, we're doing this, so we're going to do it right. Let it fly, man. And they sure did. God bless them for it.
Yeah, and I don't think people are going to look back on this era with that on any matches that came from this era in the same way that we look at that Patterson Slaughter, you know, blow off with the boot camp match. That was so well built up, and then the blow off was so extreme that people were able to like put that feud aside. Now feuds are so temporal that I don't think people have an emotional investment in them. And then, you know, the next week they're fighting somebody else for some other reason that you don't really care about to begin with.
Well, see, Russ, you know, they did used to last about, I'd say, 3 to 6 months, because you would make the tour of the arenas, the television would flow, and then you hit in the arenas. Today, the arenas don't mean shit. Everything's on television. So it's like, what are we writing this week? Let's write this and then next week, what are we writing? So yeah, they're getting fresh material every week. Last week is done. Throw that script away. They're going to something else. And it's like, see, right there is a bad word, script. And yeah, they do use it today. And it's like, that's a shame. That really is a damn shame. You lose so much.
I agree. And I think that trying to just outpace the short attention span of the general public. I mean, the one thing that I have liked about the NWA program when it was on was that they were building a storyline continuously with their wrestlers that had a long-term angle to it and something that they were building to. And then the COVID kind of got in the middle of all that. But I'm hoping that Billy Corgan does go back to that. I'm seeing more of that in AEW, and the WWE has totally abandoned it. And I'm hoping that, you know, if eventually the ratings are bad enough for the WWE, they might stand up and take notice and realize what they're doing is killing. But again, you told me they're and you're right, they're in the business for selling stock. But maybe one of these days, people are going to just say, I don't want to be invested in something that's this crappy. And maybe that'll be the message that Vince
they've got their fish, believe me, and the fish aren't going anywhere. But, you know, it's like when you make people follow a script, it's like like actors that struggle. You can tell when somebody's trying to remember and recite, then they lose their acting. If you put somebody in a ring, it's hard enough. And if you're going to remember this spot, that spot, they're doing this, and it's like where before, okay, hey, Russ, here's the finish. You and Nikita are going to do this. You're going over. Here's how. You go work out the rest. And it was smooth. And it flowed. Boom.
I agree.
Today, it's like, well, now, what are we doing after? And then what do I got to do? So they're too confused, and they're too panicked that they're going to screw up.
It's true. That's the best matches I did were ones where I was just told to finish, and me and the wrestlers all worked out what was going to happen, versus when Roland would come to us from APW and just absolutely script out every moment of the match. And we were always thinking, is this the spot? Is this the spot? Is this the spot? Is this the spot? I got to remember this. I got to be here. I got to be on this angle. I got to be in front of this camera. I got to be in front of the fans for this spot. And you know, that kind of like precise road mapping becomes very difficult, especially in a live thing where eventually, you know, you're waiting for the suplex and the suplex doesn't happen. You know, the wrestlers forget to do that setup spot.
And then somebody comes back and says, oh, look, hey, you missed this spot here. Don't you remember we went over this? And it's like, now they're destroyed, okay? And it's like the next time they go out there, they're going to be so friggin' nervous, they're not going to remember their own damn name. I don't like that kind of business. It's just, That's
And
why
I
I'm not
think
watching it.
that we see it as a result, and I think it that kind of heavy scripting is what is killing the WWE product for people like us who remember the way it was before, you know, it got over scripted. And so it's hard because our generation would normally be the ones that bring the next generation forwards by explaining the things that mattered to us and showing them, like, for instance, if I show my kids a baseball game, I tell them, you know, the strategies and things like that that make the baseball game worth watching. But if I'm trying to do the same thing with wrestling, I can't look at wrestling now and be able to tell it to my kids and give them a reason why they would care about this match when I don't care about it either. It's really hard to try to transfer something to the next generation. So I have a feeling that wrestling is going to be sort of stuck in like the next 10 years as this next generation moves forward. I'm not sure it's going to transfer back to the very next generation after that. And that is where I think wrestling is going to be in a real crisis. They're making a lot of money now, but they are going to find themselves without another generation picking it up and moving it forwards, kind of the way boxing is struggling now. I mean, right. Boxing is slowly bringing itself back, but for about the last 20 years, boxing was irrelevant. MMA, more kids can tell you who the MMA champion is than they can who the boxing champion is. That was certainly not the way it was when we were younger.
No, when Ali and Frazier met, Ali and Foreman, the world stopped. And everybody watched. It was a big deal.
Yeah, and everyone knew who those guys were. Most people don't really know who the boxing champions are now. And I feel the WWE has that danger of becoming irrelevant like that if they don't start realizing there was a thing that made wrestling go for generations and made it popular for generations, and that's not what they're doing right now. They may just be frozen in one generation, and that may be it for them.
I think they are playing their last beat. They really are. And it's like, when this is over, what are you going to do? How are you going to top this? You can't get any stupider, and you can't get any crazier. All you can do now is go backwards. And people
Vince might just say, hold my beer on that one, on the stupider part. But anyway, Nikita, it's been great to have you as our guest again for the last couple of weeks. You've been wonderful on the show. We definitely will have you back because we really appreciate your voice and your input on everything. And hopefully some of our fans will pick up copies of your book and check you out on Amazon and Crowbar Press. So
see me on Facebook and we'll talk. And Russell, thank you. Always a pleasure. And
this has been great. Anytime. Really appreciate it. You have a great holiday season.
You too.
We'll talk
again. Have a good holiday.
All right. Good night, everybody. See you next week.